Interior design isn't just about picking pretty pieces, it's about balance. And the 80-20 rule is one of the simplest ways to achieve it. 80% of your space should be the foundation, which is timeless, cohesive, and grounding, while the other 20% adds personality, contrast, and movement. That is what keeps a room from feeling flat or becoming forgettable. You don't need more furniture or endless accessories. You just need the right ratio of structure to style, calm to character, and tradition to surprise. This is the principle designers use to create spaces that feel timeless without being safe or boring. So let's look at a few examples so I can show you what I'm talking about. The first way to apply the 80-20 rule here is 80% timeless, 20% modern. Because traditional bones give a space longevity, but a small dose of modern keeps it feeling fresh. And so think of this like a classic outfit with a cool accessory, right? The foundation is familiar and comforting, but the accent is what keeps it current. Okay, so in this example, we've got 80% traditional cabinetry and 20% these sleek updates, right? And what we see is a kitchen that's built on timeless design. Shaker cabinets, these soft arches, warm brass details, and an overall neutral color palette. So that's the 80%, right? Warm, soft, and classic, but then come the modern touches. We've got this beautiful island countertop with a bold veined stone pattern. We've got clean lined cone pendants with these twisted chords that feel artisan but minimal at the same time. Sleek integrated hardware and flush cabinetry that just balance out this beautiful vintage range. Open sight lines, just a minimal amount of upper shelving, and this flat hood design with no ornamentation. And that arched walkthrough, it definitely nods to tradition, but that clean curve makes it super modern. And so together, this mix makes the kitchen feel really collected without dipping into being trendy, right? It's like it belongs to someone with actual taste, not just someone who's chasing what's hot at the moment right now. So if rule number 1 was 80% timeless, 20% modern, then rule number 2 is 80% structured forms and 20% organic shapes, right? Because most timeless interiors are built on clean lines and structured shapes, like square sofas, rectangular coffee tables, and grid-based layouts. But to stop a space from feeling too boxy or too stiff, designers often introduce 20% of organic forms. And a big part of the reason for that is that curves and irregular silhouettes soften the architecture, add movement, and just create contrast without disrupting the overall flow of the room. And so here, this space is really grounded in symmetry, right? It's got these large windows, the geometric rug, and this rectangular wooden coffee table. So that's your solid 80%, but then comes the 20% twist. We've got this wavy cloud-like sofa in boucle that looks soft and freeform. We've got this low stool with carved legs and a rounded leather seat, and these curved ceramics and the bust sculpture on the table, these just add artistic softness to the harder surfaces. And so these organic touches stop the space from feeling rigid or too serious, and it's the kind of 20% that doesn't clash, but instead it floats, balances, and just breaks the grid just enough. Now, rule number 3 is 80% cohesive color palette and 20% contrast. And so a space feels timeless when the color palette just flows, right? So you want to stick to 80% of the room in harmonized tones. So that'll often be neutrals, warm whites, or natural finishes. And then bring in 20% that creates contrast. So it could be something darker, bolder, or moodier to just ground the space and make it feel alive. And so to show you this, I want to show you 2 bathrooms from the same apartment, because these bathrooms use this clean tonal base, right? Soft white walls, the muted tile flooring, and creamy countertops. And so that's your calm, timeless 80%, but then comes the 20% contrast. And that comes with materials that bring drama and dimension, okay? We've got a sharp black and white marble trim around the shower, these matte black fixtures that frame the sink and stand out against the pale backdrops, and the warm wood vanities that have these distinct personalities, right? One is using burl wood, so it's swirly. It's got this high variation grain that feels bold, artistic, and really vintage. And then the other is using a straight grain walnut. So I would say the burl wood acts as a true accent material, so it falls under the 20% because you only need a small amount of it to make a statement. But then the straight walnut is more subtle and timeless, and so it could blend into the 80% depending on the context. But all these small contrasts prevent the space from feeling washed out while still keeping everything really cohesive. So now we're pushing the limits a little bit further because rule number 4 is 80% unified style and 20% curveball. Because a timeless interior starts with a consistent design language. You want to stick to one clear style across 80% of your space, whether that's warm wood, clean lines, or neutral tones, whatever. And then introduce a subtle curveball. Not to steal the spotlight, but just to break the monotony just enough. So check out this kitchen, right? It's wrapped in this warm, vertical grain wood with flat cabinetry, neutral stone counters, and soft lighting, right? So that's your 80%. It's solid, timeless, and cohesive. But then there's the terrazzo backsplash. It's not loud or colorful, but it adds just enough contrast to wake up the space. The speckled surface breaks up the flat textures without clashing, and paired with the accents on the nearby shelf, like the terracotta vases and the matte ceramics, you get just a dash of artistry without veering into clutter. And in my view, it's just a perfect example of how one visual twist can elevate an otherwise relatively rudimentary design. Okay, so rule number 5 here is 80% clean lines and 20% texture play. So clean lines and smooth finishes make a space feel structured and timeless. But to avoid looking too flat or too sterile, you need to add a little texture to soften things up. But just 20% through fabrics, weaves, or some kind of surface with depth can bring a ton of warmth and dimension. And so here we've got a room that's mostly sleek and smooth, right? The black stone tabletop, these pale wood floors, soft white walls, and really clean glass windows. That's your calm, flat 80%. But the 20% texture comes in just the right spots. We've got this woven seagrass chair with a knotted backrest, these layered rugs, one of them flat woven, one of them with subtle ribbing, and a rough ceramic planter bowl, and a carved stone pedestal. These elements don't interrupt the flow, they give your eyes something to land on. And so the space still feels minimalist, but it has texture that you can feel even through these photographs. Now, rule number 6, 80% base pieces and 20% playful decor or art. Here's how to think about this. You want to keep 80% of your space made up of clean, classic elements. So neutral walls, foundational furniture, and simple layouts. And then you layer in 20% of playful or expressive decor, things that show your personality but can be easily swapped or refreshed. And this keeps your space feeling current without overcommitting to any one particular trend. And so take a look at these spaces as an example, right? They start with a calm, minimal base. White walls, pale wood floors, warm neutrals, and timeless furniture. That is the strong 80%, a backdrop that works with almost anything. But then the 20% playful layer comes in through bold and creative details. This large round fiber art piece made of hanging thread in mustard, cream, and black, right? This is soft, but it's also impossible to ignore. We've got this lime green abstract wall piece above the stairs, so it's bold both in color and in shape, which gives movement to an otherwise quiet corner. In the dining room, we've got this yellow dome pendant light and colorful artwork on the wall that has some kind of a grid-like texture that adds even more dimension. And then in the living area, this very tall painting in these bright saturated tones, and even this leather sling chair reads like a statement, right? It's less about function and more about the visual weight. But the thing to keep in mind here is that all of these pieces are easy to remove or replace, which means that the personality of the room is flexible as opposed to being fixed. And this is how you use that playful 20% to keep your space from feeling like a catalog and instead allow it to grow with you over time. Because in the end, the magic isn't in having more, it's in knowing how much of each thing to use. And in all the rules I just shared with you, the 80% creates order and flow, while the 20% gives the space life and individuality. So whether you use color, shape, texture, or pieces of art, the goal is always the same: to make your home feel grounded, yet still unmistakably yours. And when you strike the right ratio, you're not just arranging furniture or picking finishes, you're shaping an atmosphere, a space that feels both timeless and alive every time you step into it. So if you enjoyed this video, I've left links to a few others I think you'll like in the description below, or you can check out this one up here, which is YouTube's #1 choice for the video it thinks you'll like most. I'll see you there.